It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. Chuck, the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin is back in session. There's some big cases working their way up to the Supreme Court. Which ones do you think they'll hear in this coming session?
Well, let's dispose of a little one, and yet it's a big one, and that is the punishment for Gableman. Justice Gableman is talk about a dumpster fire. This is a guy who was so out of it that even though Robin Voss hires him to do an investigation, he totally blows that, wastes roughly $1 million of taxpayer money, or at least that's the allegation some people would make, does all sorts of ethical issues, is now going to be in front of the court, and it's a matter of whether they will approve the recommendation of the master or whatever they hired to take a look at this. And it is just hard to believe that Republicans could ever be behind this guy. I mean, now that you see what's going on, he is the ultimate dumpster fire. And I think that this is, I would not be surprised to see unanimity in the opposition or in the decision about him at the court, although there are a couple people there he served with, so maybe they'll give him some dispensation. But that is going to be an ugly thing. But and it's really not, it's not a good commentary on where our Supreme Court has been, that this man was a Supreme Court justice and really did some things that are really ethically questionable. And that's what the masters found, and he's agreed to that. That's really a small thing. And what does that do for the impact on people's lives? And I think we can see from recent elections that people are focused on what's happening in my life. Well, things that will matter in people's lives. Number one, Act 10 is probably going to be up. And the components of that and what it did to the lives of people who were in public service, we are way underpaying our teachers now because of this and things. And if there was any feeling in the part of the public that maybe teachers were or public people had too many benefits, I think that those feelings have gone away. But the final thing, and the thing that could be most impactful to the entire country, but makes a big difference in Wisconsin, is redistricting. And that would mean, is there a chance that this court would take up the issue of whether or not Wisconsin's congressional districts, not our legislative districts in the state, congressional districts would be redistricted? That looks like a tough sell because there's a lot of fact finding that has to go on to get this in place for this upcoming election. However, I think most people would say in a 50-50 state, as Scott and I often talk about, how in the world can you have 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats? I'll tell you how, because of gerrymandering. And also because the world has been turned on its head with Donald Trump. Most people in Wisconsin believe that this should be a 5-3 or probably a 4-4 situation in our congressional delegation. To me, it looks like Derek Van Orden is going to lose his seat. He should be doing some job search right now in the next election. But there's no way that you can do more than a 5-3 setup. In other words, Democrats have no opportunity in the current maps to win an additional congressional seat. That ought to change. It ought to happen. And it's a really big question about whether this Supreme Court can meet the moment to do that. They have now a progressive group of leaders there, and they should be able to make this happen. But whether they can exercise leadership to get it done is something very important. And it's important not just for Wisconsin, but for our democracy. If we're short one seat for Democrats in the House next time, to keep Donald Trump's situation going, people across the country and in Wisconsin will be upset. So those are the 3 that I see that are big this term, and there will be others.
I think those all are fairly important cases. On the case of Justice Gableman, he essentially agreed that his license should be suspended for 3 years. The referee said it should be suspended for 3 years. A progressive group comes in and says, no, we want it to be 5 years or longer. I presume the court will take the referee's recommendation. That's sort of the easy answer here. But regardless, I don't think you'll see anybody standing up to defend Justice Gableman or his actions during the course of it. So I think the story will go away relatively quickly. Huge impact, of course, on his life. An important statement about the judicial system. And so it could very well be a large majority on the court that hands down that decision. The redistricting thing, of course, is fascinating to me in a number of ways, in that the court already said no to an earlier effort on redistricting on the congressional races. The only thing that's happened in between there is all the other states now are beginning to do mid-term redistricting of these seats. That would be a political response, though, from the court. And I would point out that while you think it's gerrymandering that has made this thing 6-2, that map was forwarded by Tony Evers and was approved by the Republican legislature. So to me, I doubt that Tony Evers sent a gerrymandered Republican map to the legislature for their review. On Act 10, that is a can of worms. I would be fascinated if the court chose to take that up. I mean, there have been more than a dozen state and federal court decisions upholding Act 10. Now they're going to find some other angle to try to overturn it all. I would suggest that's a matter of politics more than a matter of law. But at a time when affordability is the top issue in the state, taking off all those constraints on public employee compensation that were in Act 10 and allowing those costs to increase at the state and local level are going to drive property taxes up in Wisconsin at a time in which people are already saying, I can't afford this. This is nuts. So I think that the court would be wise to not take up Act 10 or to accelerate that, especially not before the spring election that they have for Supreme Court. You want your candidate to be able to win or lose on the issues that she wants to run on, not necessarily on the ones that the court is going to kick into the race by decisions it makes.
Well, I agree with Scott entirely about the Gableman decision, and I think that's the way it will come down, but it is a sad tale. But I think Scott is correct, and I would not be surprised to see even a unanimous Supreme Court. You would hope that they could find a chance here to be unanimous. And since they do have the referee's recommendation, I think that that's likely to happen. With regard to redistricting, I think the unfairness of this is widely apparent to the public. The public has a real problem with courts when the court isn't able to find a way to do justice to meet what's clearly a problem somewhere in the legal system. And frankly, I believe that there are ways that this court can find legal mechanisms in order to make that happen. And I think if that happens, it is very easy to draw seats so that there will be 4 Democratic congressional seats and 4 Republican seats. And that makes sense given that we are a 50 state. There are also ways to draw it so that it could be 5-3 either way, depending upon what happens. And that's a possibility as well. But the public wants to see this. It's important. There are some awful things happening nationally. It would be great for Wisconsin to show that with a neutral party, the Supreme Court, they would be able to come to a decision on this that would get us to something that the entire public sees as a good thing. With regard to Act 10, I agree with all the political arguments that Scott has made, with one exception. I don't think that any Democratic governor moving forward is going to let the Republican defunding of public education, K-12 education, to continue. I am talking frequently with leaders in public education who have been forced to have referenda to be able to operate their schools. And that is driven onto the property tax. By the way, that has become a political angle for Republicans to hurt public education. For example, there are $325 per pupil that each school district should be able to have from the state in order to help pay for the increase in cost in their district. We are under inflation for the last 18 years. It's terrible what has been happening. Republicans refuse to do that in the state budget, which means that those dollars have to be picked up from property taxes. So Scott is right. People will be upset with that. No Democratic governor going forward will allow that to happen. And I don't care whether Republicans are in control of the House or not. That will not be in the next state budget, I guarantee it. So lots of big issues. There will be others, but the Supreme Court, it continues to be at the state level, as it is at the national, a major player in the public policies that affect our citizenry.
We agree on that.
We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.